What's up, everyone? Hey, I'm currently doing a live stream and talking about some of the things that I support Jordan Peterson on. And I've recently been seeing him in the news a lot on stage. You guys saw with the political correctness debate, with the monk debates, and just in general, I think it's important to address some of the things that I do support Jordan Peterson on, as well as some of the intellectual dark web, things that I support them on, and also that some of the things that I actually missed when I was trying to get across everything in my head to Jordan when we were at the fireside chat in February, because it was difficult to get everything that I wanted to chat about out there. So one of the first things that I started talking to Jordan about were competence hierarchies and dominance hierarchies. And so the reason why he chooses competence hierarchy actually makes a lot of sense, right? And the history makes a lot of sense. When we look at neurology and we look at the nervous system developing over 1/3 of a billion years now, it's crazy that that is lodged into us as well. Science is lodged into us. Neurology and hierarchies are lodged into us. And remember, on the show, we do our best to be as nuanced and multivariate as possible. So that's what we'll do right now as well. We'll be very multivariate and nuanced here. Are there forces that influence the hierarchy that are tyrannical? Absolutely there are. There is corruption that is influencing it. It's totally true. What are those variables and how much do they influence the hierarchy is a very interesting question that we should go and try and understand the variables and how much of the hierarchy is influenced by tyranny. But a vast majority of the hierarchy is influenced by people's competence. So my ability, your ability, anyone's ability to just make something of themselves. It's more difficult for certain people to make something of themselves because they're born in a zip code where the socioeconomic status is much lower than in another zip code. And that literature is very clear, and it's totally true. So as we aim to become better and actualize and climb up this competence hierarchy, it almost becomes a necessity along the way to figure out how to take some sort of meaning or purpose from this climb. And a lot of people get lost along the way, including myself at times. So many people get lost, if not everyone gets lost. They can't find meaning, can't find purpose in their life. And that's why we see kind of a little bit of a purpose crisis that's going on, especially in developed countries. There's a lot of people that can't seem to find purpose. And in order to find that, it's a whole hero's journey, a lot of chaos, a lot of perseverance and grit through that, and then finding whatever you care about in your world, in your life, and going and bringing that to the world and bringing that value to the world. So we didn't get to touch too much on competence hierarchies and exactly what percentage and what variables are the influencers in the tyranny, in the corruption side of things, how much people are actually held back. For example, this is really important to remember. People in the US you get many cases of people that are held back, that are of black skin color or of female, and that is just a true thing, that that people do get held back in that sense from their potential. And if you transport the same idea structure to China, if you are a white person in China or in Japan or in Botswana or wherever you are in the world, you are a minority then. So you as a white person, it's going to be more difficult for you to make impact, to climb up the hierarchy as well. So the general notion of it being just hyper-localized in one space is also applicable to all these other places across the world. So it's this constant intermixing and interchanging of where are people judging other people based on their groups and not based on their individuality. And that is a very interesting idea, is to analyze the hierarchy for competence and for tyranny. Where is it tyrannical, in what part of the world, what percentage are these variables influencing tyranny, how much is it? And then we have people like Dr. Vivian Ming, that's one of my mentors from over 3 years ago, that instilled the words maximizing human potential into me. Well, she calculated a tax on being different. So in these certain hyperlocal areas across the world, there's actually a tax on being different. It's more difficult for you to go and make your impact because of these strange sort of ways that the hierarchy is being influenced by other people, by culture, by different economic dynamics, political dynamics, sociological and psychological dynamics. So this being so old and so baked into us makes me want to talk about this point for so long. And I think that's the hilarity of the lobster. That is the hilarity of the nervous system and of the tremendous impact that has on our lives. 25 years old, to think of something that's 300 million years old is it's a joke in comparison in time length. So I can't sit here with my brain and just think that I know more than what evolution has put together over millions of years. So I think it's an important practice in humility, and it's an important practice in just knowing that the thoughts that come to my mind are not these guaranteed thoughts of correctness, that I'm totally open and willing to let my ideas go in light of other better ideas. So I tried asking Jordan this on stage on the 17th of February as well, where I talked to him about the case of a lobster that has so many different homes and just prevents other lobsters that are lower on the competence hierarchy of getting any of the homes. As in, it's almost as though there is an excess of homes that this top lobster has, and it prevents other ones from getting homes. Now, is that true in every scenario? No. Why don't they just go find a home that's not one that that lobster owns? Well, there's a lot of complication and a lot of variables that go into this, but the general idea is that if a lot of materialism or property, in this case homes that this lobster has, are going in the ownership of this lobster, then what long-term effects does that have on the community of people that it lives around? The medium lobsters, the lower lobsters on the hierarchy of lobsters, and also on the future of that community. Is that lobster going to get the best mates and then decide to be the king lobster, and all the other ones, how do they live? Do they die off? What happens? So the competence hierarchy is actually quite fascinating, and it's baked into our evolution and our neurology, and there's been a lot of conversation about the way that currently male and female interact within the competence hierarchy. And I think that this is a very interesting conversation, and I think many of you likely remember the conversation where Jordan, I believe it was on Fox, was talking to a reporter, a journalist, an interviewer, about how when females do things like add additional augmentations to their aesthetics, then it makes them more attractive for men, as in when women put heels on, or they put lipstick on, or makeup on, and that is a direct relation of the women's propensity to want to attract mates at the higher end of the hierarchy. Men do the same thing in a different way. Men will work their ass off relentlessly to try and accrue some sort of competence in the hierarchy. And this is very frequently seen with like influence or impact or money, that kind of stuff. And then that attracts them higher female mates as well. So that dynamic has been going on for a really long time between males and females of trying to attract mates that are of higher influence, higher competence on the hierarchy. And it is evolutionarily baked into us all the way back to the hunter-gatherer days, when it's the show-off hypothesis, the hunting hypothesis, that used to come back from a big hunt, and the warrior that would have the most meat, the most fur, the most material and food that the village could use, the women would be most attracted to that male. And the same thing in return for the males. If the males are observing the females, and there's females that are expressing the greatest nurture and the greatest emotional intelligence, then males will be very attracted to that as well. And then they rank them higher on their competence hierarchy in terms of the responsibility there. Now, is this to say that males are only hunters and females are only gatherers and nurturers? Absolutely not. And we don't like that kind of binary thinking. So let's not do that anymore, where we try and put each other into straw-manned binary positions. Let's keep it very nuanced and very multivariate. And so it's totally fine for women to go and become hunters, and for men to become nurturers and gatherers. Is totally cool. So, but where are their skills maximized the best at? So, as many times has been mentioned now by James Damore and Jordan Peterson, is that we funnel into certain categories of wanting to do certain things. As in, like, men typically funnel themselves into engineering roles, females funnel themselves into social work, nursing. And I mean, the truth is that you see that every time you go to like a hospital. You see a lot of female nurses, and you never think like, man, I wonder what amount of tyranny is being influenced on the nursing system that doesn't allow men to be nurses. Well, there is a little bit, right? Just like there is with women trying to be engineers, like men that come in nursing, you know, females and people that are hiring male nurses, men have to have emotional intelligence to be a nurse. You have to have really good caretaking skills to be a nurse. You have to have a lot of respect for other humans, deep connection to other humans in order to be a good nurse. So the same thing applies to when a female goes for an engineering role. There's a lot of males, heavily dominated by males in engineering, and so the female's got to have a lot of logic and a lot of not agreeableness. They have to be willing to be disagreeable, and they have to be, you know, willing to argue with another person, especially man in that case, about something that they might have the best idea about. And so then there's these funnels that occur, and so it's actually not healthy to try and to completely put regulations on top of people, obviously, and say that, oh, like, you know, you have to have this many hires of this certain group identity. That's not healthy. It's more about the individual and them going and choosing whatever path they want. But the question is, how do you provide every individual with any path? As in, no matter what zip code you're born into, can that child that's still born into a low SES zip code, socioeconomic status, can they still have the tools necessary for them to learn how to program? Especially like, let's say it's a black girl that's in South Dakota, where I'm from. It's a little bit more difficult when you're in a state that's heavily white, in order for you to have your potential maximized, just because there's a lot of forces of like someone that's in a management position is going to be looking and trying to hire people, and they're going to hire other similar people that are like them, like other white people, and it requires a certain skill to observe the person as just an individual and see that, oh, this black girl that knows how to code is actually as good or better than the other people here that know how to code. So this applies to the hierarchy, and the competence apply to so many aspects of our lives that we haven't even started to analyze and understand all the different variables that go into it, and we can't make it binary. We have to talk about it in detail and in all of its variables, because it's very fascinating and it's very interesting, and it's probably one of the biggest questions of our day is that, are we going to continue, and we ask this on our show all the time on simulation, is that although the Pinker argument's true that this bottom of the hierarchy is slowly coming up, very, very slowly, that the people at the very top of the hierarchy are accelerating at a much more rapid rate, especially exacerbated by all these different types of technology. So the question then becomes is like, what do we do in the dominance hierarchy, in this competence hierarchy? What do we do there so that we don't experience some sort of a tragic bifurcation of the human species based on socioeconomic status? And that's possible that does happen, and a lot of people that I know are saying things like, well, taking care of the poor costs a lot of money, or they're already so mentally and physically ill, it's so difficult to take care of them. At the same time, we have a lot of compassion for them. Like, it's like, holy cow, I can't believe that you're in that mental or physical state. How can I help you? How can we make systems that help you? How can we provide you with a computer or a work or the right physical therapy and mental therapies in order to get on a path that's productive? So that is on this hierarchy of competence. What's going to happen to this middle area where the wealth's now being concentrated a lot at the top and not as much on the bottom and middle? What's going to happen to that bottom and middle? How are we going to figure that out? I challenged Jordan Peterson when we were on stage, because he said that people couldn't be retrained for work. And I said, probably not in 6 months, but they could be retrained for work in 6 years. In 6 years, you can rewire a whole mind to care more about the future and these different areas of expertise that one could learn and work in. So I think that it's possible to retrain somebody in 6 years, and even less than that, especially with augmented reality headsets that are experientially immersing people into the design of an environment that they're able to engage and interact with and learn inside of. So there are different ways to retrain people, and how are we exactly going to address that part of the equation of the competence hierarchy as we evolve as a civilization? What are we going to do about the different socioeconomic statuses? It's a really important question. Many people were curious why I referenced Jordan Peterson reminding me of Tony Robbins, and the reason why I said that was because of his rule about standing up straight with your shoulders back, rule number 1. And that's what the lobsters do with their neurology to say that, and Tony Robbins does that too. Yes, right? So that was where I kind of made that connection. I thought that was quite interesting. So we talked a little bit about the tyranny versus the competence, and we talked about different places in the world and how that's affected in those different places and what we do about the socioeconomic status there. So that's about competence hierarchies. That's what I didn't get to talk to Jordan about regarding competence hierarchies. There's a lot more there that didn't get unpacked. I mean, we can talk about incels really quick. I think this is an important thing to talk about. There's a lot of men that are currently upset with the hierarchy and that are saying that they're involuntarily celibate. And I think that that's a poor excuse for men to not learn social skills, to be able to learn how to approach women, to learn how to fall on their face when they get rejected. At the same time, I understand that there is a certain category of men that, and women, that are very socially hesitant to such a degree that they prefer to be in their own space only. And in that case, then you pretty much only have the choice of finding somebody else like that. So if you're not willing to go outside of your social bubble, this comfortability of being alone, then you need to find someone else like that only really wants to be alone, and then you can interact just a little and everything. But for all of the rest, like, go out there and try. Go fall on your face a bunch when you walk across the bar or the museum or wherever you're at a meetup, at a hike, and you just start talking to someone about what they care about. What's your name? Oh, Kelly, great, Kelly. Like, what do you care about? Like, what are you building into our world? What are you passionate about? And what are your values? And just be there with that feeling of like total uncomfortability of, oh God, at any moment Kelly could turn around and tell me to screw off. And if that happens, like, it's important to pick ourselves up and persevere and just go on and go forth. And the same thing, people talk about throwing wrenches into the hierarchy and making it different in ways, like potentially having female traits inside of leadership positions at corporations. And I think that's a very interesting thing that I'll touch on in a little more detail. But in this example with, why can't females approach males as well? They do sometimes. It happened to me as well. And I would highly recommend that females do approach males. I think that's a very interesting way to throw a wrench into the equation, is for a female to also be like, hey, Paul, what do you care about? What are your values? And then that would make a little more friendly conversation as well across the board. And there, of course, are many ways that men need to be a little bit more, careful as well, especially since they're, in many ways physical and aggressive and things like that. There are also men that are gentle and more feminine, and females that are more aggressive. So let's touch on this. There was the conversation about pay gap. Although there is a pay gap, we don't know exactly what variables are going into the pay gap. And it's really important to understand that there's a lot of variables. It's like climate change. It's like healthcare or immigration. There's so many variables that go into this complicated equation. It's really difficult to just say, like, I objectively know it's this one way and that's how it exists and that's that. So let's break it down by variables. Like, why are there less women in executive roles at companies? Well, this was touched on really well by Jordan in his Channel 4 interview with Kathy Newman. But the general gist of it is just that it's men and women take different career paths, just in general. There are women that are willing to be very disagreeable and women that are willing to work 80 hours to try and climb to the top of these competence hierarchies. But women also care a lot about nurturing kids and having families. And men are willing to sacrifice that, and their bodies are able to have that at later ages. So there's these things that come into play. Now, is there still tyranny that's involved in the politics of the hierarchy? Yes, there is. We don't know what percentage and what variables are exactly the influencers, but take into account feminine traits. This is a very interesting conversation point. Right now, I've been in my head a lot while I've been talking to you. And because I just took a breath and slowed down a little, I was able to drop into my heart a little more, and I was feeling a little more. And I think that the trait of feeling and the trait of emotion is a little more concentrated in women than it is in men. And so because of that, if we were to take some of these traits of feeling and emotion and competence around emotion and how compassion, empathy, that maybe that the workplace could become a better place if men were more humble in wanting to accept feminine qualities into the workplace. And maybe the workplace would become a better place. Maybe more agreeable at times, but still disagreeable with seeing which ideas prevail. So that's a little more nuance onto what we didn't exactly get to cover in the conversation about men and women in the workplace. So that's a lot about competence hierarchies, and I'm sure that I didn't even get to touch on a couple of the other things I wanted to touch on, like the genetic fitness landscape and being able to jump from different hill to different hill across different subjects, and the importance of being a polymath in that sense. And I'm gonna have to probably do another one of these where I talk about another whole different category. I will. I'm gonna do a whole different one where I talk about some of the categories. Just a temporary maybe segue into that next one is that just take into account the idea that I've posted about, which is that you can't just become a victim to the world. Even though there is oppression going on in certain places and the social fabric has big tears in it, and it's not for low income, low SES places that are in zip codes that are specific low SES areas, it's more difficult to pick yourself up and move forth. It's totally true than if you're privileged in an area of a higher, more affluent zip code that makes it easier for you to achieve whatever you want. You get access to computers, get access to whatever you want. But it's also a mental state, and we got to snap people out of the victim mental state and get them into the champion mental state, into the individual awakening actualization, as well as building a better social fabric to get more kids in underprivileged areas actualized. So we need to build a better fabric, but also people need to snap out of the victim mentality and move forward. So that was another one of the things that I really wanted to touch on. And, you know, we'll get into this a little bit in the next shoot, but lift yourself up and get going into the world and build something of value and find purpose, find meaning, find really good mentors and friends, and build really cool projects into the world that influence people and make it a better world together. So that's pretty much it. Much love. Thank you for tuning in. Let's build a better world together. Let's understand how the competence hierarchy exists and how flattening out things might not be the best. So it's probably a good idea to figure out how to work within this hierarchical structure and try and uplift everyone together. Otherwise, there might be some sort of a bifurcation, and have more multivariate conversations about what's going on between men, women, other people that don't affiliate with male or female, as well as people of high socioeconomic status, low socioeconomic status. What's going on in there? What are all these variables that are crunching in, and how can we have better discussion about them? So I want to just, personally thank you for tuning in. I want to thank, Jordan Peterson. I want to thank him for teaching a lot of us about these things and bringing them to our attention, as well as a couple other members of the intellectual dark web that have brought them to our attention as well. So thanks to people like James Damore with his initial Google memo, as well as people like Eric Weinstein, Brett Weinstein, and Dave Rubin that are continuously trying to have these conversations. I've made a couple videos challenging them as well, which is true. I do challenge them in certain ways, but I also agree with them in many ways. So thanks for tuning in and checking out this content. I greatly appreciate it. We do here at Simulation. We have a lot of conversations about science and entrepreneurship. And so whenever we stem into something that's a little bit more political like this, we still talk about the hierarchy and how that's baked into neurology, and neurology is a science, and evolution is a science, and sociology is a science. It's a social science, how that's interacting from wealth, from gender, from all these different ways within within the hierarchy in different hierarchies around the world, in China, in Russia, in Ecuador, in the US. They're all different. So similar but different. So thanks again for tuning in. If you found this content useful, give it a share. Give it a share, talk to other people about it, comment below with your thoughts. I'd love to feature some of your thoughts on our Twitter and Instagram. Give us a like, give us a subscribe, join the family. Support us on Patreon. We're trying to scale this endeavor to impact more people, hopefully convince some of the hard hitters in that intellectual dark web. I would love to get like someone like Candace Owens on the show and talk to her about some of her thoughts about this, and other people from the intellectual dark web. So thanks again for tuning in, and I'll catch you on another one of these broadcasts soon. Lots more topics to cover, lots more variables to touch on. So thank you. Peace.